Hello, and welcome to Insider Insights. I'm Emma Wegner, Associate Educator in Public Programs and Creative Practice at the Met. In this series, we're providing closer looks at objects from the collection and exhibitions, as well as a glimpse behind the scenes of the work of Met experts who interpret and care for them. Today, we're joined by my colleague Thayer Tolles, Maritza F. Vilcek Curator in the American Wing. Thayer will share with us some works from the exhibition Karl Bodmer, North American Portraits, that opened at the Met on April 5th and will be on view through July 25th. Swiss-born artist, Karl Bodmer's extraordinary watercolor portraits of the North American interior and its indigenous people were created from 1833 through 34 while he traveled from St. Louis up the Missouri River. Thank you so much for joining us there and for sharing these remarkable images.
Thank you, Emma, for your kind introduction. Hello, and again, my name is Thayer Tolles, Maritza F. Vilcek, Curator of American Painting and Sculpture in the Met's American Wing. I'm privileged to speak to you today from the ancestral homelands of the Pequot people of Connecticut and respectfully acknowledge the Met's location in Lenape-Hoking, the homeland of the Lenape people. During the next few minutes, I'll present an overview of the exhibition Karl Bodmer North American Portraits on view at the Met through July 25th, 2021. It focuses on the portraits of Indigenous peoples by Karl Bodmer, which he completed in 1833-34 during a remarkable journey to the Upper Plains region of North America. The 45 objects in the show come to us from Joslin Art Museum in Omaha, and we're grateful for their generous collaboration. At the Met, the exhibition is made possible by the Warner Foundation Fund and the Lewis and Virginia Clemente Foundation Fund. Born in 1809, Bodmer received training in watercolor and engraving in his native Switzerland before moving to Koblenz, Germany by 1828. His picturesque local views caught the eye of German explorer and naturalist Maximilian, Prince of Wied-Neuwied, who had led a scientific expedition to Brazil between 1815 and 17. Maximilian hired Bodmer to accompany a voyage up the Missouri River and intended to later issue a travelogue for European audiences to be accompanied by print illustrations, as he had done following his trip to Brazil. The travelers set sail from Holland and reached Boston on July 4, 1832. As this map indicates, over the next 8 months, they made their way westward to St. Louis, the hub of the North American fur trade. There they made final preparations for their voyage, which included seeking the advice of William Clark, who had traveled the Missouri River with Meriwether Lewis from 1804 to 6 and presently served as Federal Superintendent of Indian Affairs. Bodmer and Maximilian also saw the paintings of George Catlin, who had traveled the river the year before in 1832. Among those who sat for both Catlin and Bodmer was this prominent Kenai Blackfoot chief, who had played a leading role in opening Blackfoot territories to U.S. traders in 1831. The Upper Plains region of the early 1830s was a vast network of indigenous communities, little known to non-native people beyond traders and trappers. Bodmer and Maximilian relied on American Fur Company personnel to facilitate introductions to tribal leaders, provide transport by steamboat, keelboat, and Mackinaw boat, and shelter them in Fur Company forts located along the river. On April 10, 1833, the travelers left St. Louis by steamboat. Over the next year, they undertook what would be a round-trip journey of almost 5,000 miles to the northwestern reaches of the Upper Missouri in present-day Montana. Throughout the year-long trip, Maximilian recorded notes about topics ranging from flora to fauna, to weather and topography, to indigenous peoples and their cultural practices. He later copied them into 3 journals that are among the most important non-native observations about Indigenous Americans during the 19th century. The volume you see here is included in the exhibition and is open to the page with Maximilian's drawing of the Hidatsa leader, Two Ravens, dressed in his Dog Society regalia. For his part, Bodmer produced nearly 400 field drawings in watercolor, ink, and graphite on paper, all easily portable materials. These landscapes, scenes of everyday life, and portraits served as the basis for subsequent prints that Maximilian issued in Europe beginning in 1839. Unless I note otherwise, the remainder of images I'll discuss are Bodmer watercolors in Joslin Arts Museum's collection that are included in the exhibition. I also may refer to some of the sitters by the English interpretations of their native names. The exhibition is organized into 3 gallery spaces that correspond geographically to the Missouri River journey. Traditional Bodmer scholarship has focused on what we know of his native sitters through the lens of Maximilian's writings, but we are expanding that approach by bringing greater focus to the tribal communities and their lifeways. These portraits are compelling visual responses to intercultural encounters in the early 1830s between Europeans, Indigenous Americans, and the fur trade community. It was a pivotal moment just before settler colonization depleted natural resources and led to the forcible removal of native peoples from their homelands. In addition, widespread disease, including a smallpox epidemic in 1837, decimated the communities that Bodmer and Maximilian had visited just years before. Let's consider how these portraits were negotiated and produced through diplomatic and social exchanges. Many of the indigenous communities Bodmer and Maximilian encountered were based along the riverbank. Throughout the voyage, native individuals boarded fur company vessels for purposes of trade, transit, and encounter, presenting ideal circumstances for Bodmer to paint their portraits. For instance, in May 1833, 3 Ponca men, including this chief, came from a nearby village and boarded the steamboat to request assistance from the United States, the Ponca's ally and trading partner. During the meeting, the Ponca Fur Company personnel and the European travelers passed pipes, shared a meal, and exchanged gifts. This manner of introduction was repeated time and time again throughout the journey. Here, the chief wears a silver Presidential Peace Medal bearing the likeness of James Madison that was gifted to him as a symbol of nation-to-nation friendship and allegiance. Bodmer and Maximilian also had sustained contact with Native individuals at American Fur Company posts. Indeed, they interacted with some of the same people while traveling up and back downriver. These forts were gathering sites managed by fur trade personnel who relied on the surrounding indigenous communities for trade and survival. Tribal populations established encampments nearby during the busy trading season. The first outpost the travelers reached in late May 1833 was Fort Pierre in present-day South Dakota. By mid-June, they arrived at Fort Clark, near what is now Bismarck, North Dakota. Then, in late June 1833, Bodmer and Maximilian reached Fort Union, the largest post and the terminus of steamboat navigation on the present-day border of North Dakota and Montana. This watercolor depicts the junction of the Yellowstone and Missouri rivers 3 miles upriver from Fort Union. After this point, they continued their voyage by keelboat. Finally, in August 1833, the travelers arrived at Fort McKenzie, their stopping point on the upper Missouri. Located in present-day central Montana, this post was newly erected after the Blackfoot opened up territory for trade with the United States in 1831. During the 5-week stay, Bodmer and Maximilian met with Blackfoot leaders, negotiating for information, artifacts, and permission for portrait sittings in exchange for tobacco and other goods. Throughout the whole trip, communication occurred through a combination of multiple indigenous languages, French, English, and sign language. Now that we have a sense of the chronology and geography of the voyage, let's look at some of the broader themes revealed through these portraits. Maximilian's journals record the extensive care that some of Bodmer's sitters went to in preparing for their sittings, sometimes for hours. In essence, they were self-fashioning for portraits that would not be theirs to keep and that Bodmer would transport back to Europe. Decisions about body ornamentation, hairstyle, and clothing reflected an individual's status and achievements, tangible forms of biography. Bodmer met Wamenetu during the brief stay at Fort Pierre. 3 painted feathers are positioned horizontally in his hair, each signifying a slain enemy that he touched in battle. He's also wearing vermilion, a red pigment imported from China that was distributed through the fur trade. Maximilian recorded in his journal that Bodmer gave Wamenetu pigment, quote, so that he might freshly paint himself and make himself more handsome. This he did, whereupon he was sketched. Sitters also chose objects to reflect personal tastes and preferences. For instance, Mandan and Hidatsa men often carried mirrors affixed to ceremonial items or regalia, as we see in the case of this Mandan man who has a mirror attached to the base of an eagle wing fan. Mirrors were acquired as trade items and carried additional importance in a native context, speaking to the dignity of how men comported themselves. As Maximilian noted, they would use carved wood frame mirrors to, quote, comb their hair and put their clothing in order. Painting their faces is always done in front of this important article of toiletry. Here we see his skin is smeared with white clay, which along with red clay was often used as a coloring agent by the Northern Plains peoples. Portraits also tell us about the extensive trade routes and interconnected personal networks of Upper Plains peoples. Kiosaks, a Piegan Blackfoot man, was married to a Hidatsa woman. He sat for Bodmer on the steamboat as they traveled to Fort Union, where he intended to visit his relatives. His hair is styled in the Hidatsa fashion with beaded hair bows and a braid. The striped blanket, which would have been woven by a Navajo woman, and the brass cross are of southwestern origin, evidence of the trade connections between the native tribes hundreds of miles apart. Attire also communicates information about sitters' contributions to their communities. Here, this Hidatsa man, Windbreak, wears a cap of the hide of a white buffalo, a revered animal for many Plains peoples. It suggests that he sang or drummed for the White Buffalo Cow Society, a group of mostly women elders who performed ceremonies to attract buffalo to their winter villages. The painted robe is decorated with stylized eagle feathers arranged in sunburst designs. These represent the feather crowns of headdresses worn by war leaders. Bodmer left no written accounts of his voyage, so what little we know of his working methods is gleaned through Maximilian's journals and visual examination of the watercolors. While Bodmer was not specifically trained in portraiture, he was gifted at recording likenesses due to his ability, as Maximilian observed, quote, to draw what is put before him. For most of his portraits, Bodmer hewed closely to European conventions, with likenesses generally rendered in profile or three-quarter view. He opted for spare or blank pages, rather than placing his sitters in landscape settings, instead devoting close attention to facial likeness, body decoration, and regalia. These compositional choices affirm Bodmer's awareness that the main function of the portraits was to serve as prototype field images for the final prints completed in Europe. This working method is particularly evident in this unfinished portrait of a Gros Ventre chief who sat for Bodmer during the voyage upstream to Fort McKenzie. It demonstrates that the artist first organized his compositions using graphite, then painted the personal details that he found most interesting, in this case, the bound knot of hair smeared with red clay, signifying the chief's status as a healer. Of some 90 portraits that Bodmer completed, only a handful depict women and children. The reasons may be attributed to several broad issues of cultural protocol. First of all, Bodmer and Maximilian's access was facilitated by men who did not often make the women in their communities available for sittings. Male activities were also easier for male outsiders to access. Furthermore, Native women had authority that was puzzling to Maximilian, who from his European perspective was accustomed to the manual labor they performed as signifying toil rather than community leadership. Thus, he only rarely recorded their individual identities. The women who posed for Bodmer, such as the Shoshone and Cree, were often connected to the fur trade, living in or near forts and solidifying cross-cultural relationships through marriage and other forms of kinship. In November 1833, Bodmer and Maximilian returned downriver to Fort Clark to spend the winter. Located between Mandan and Hidatsa settlements, it is visible on the ridge in the left background of this watercolor. They were there for more than 5 months, and their fort cabin was the site of many portrait sittings. In addition, the travelers were invited into the community's earth lodges, settlements of large circular dome dwellings, where they witnessed storytelling and ceremonies that took place during the winter season. Among the ceremonies that Bodmer and Maximilian observed were dances performed by special societies that each had privileged knowledge and responsibilities to their communities. Societies, which were determined by age or warrior status, shared selective elements of their dances with cultural outsiders. A number of Bodmer sitters identified their membership by posing in their society regalia. In one of his most ambitious portraits, the artist depicts a member of the prestigious Men's Buffalo Bull Society wearing a horned buffalo head mask with eyes and mouth lined with tin. The head indicates that he's an accomplished warrior and one of the leaders. He holds a shield decorated with symbols of personal medicine or power. Among the prominent individuals with whom the European travelers had the most sustained contact was the distinguished Mandan chief Madodope, described by Maximilian as, quote, not only a distinguished warrior, but possessing many fine and noble traits of character. Madodope introduced them to his allies and often visited the fort, eventually posing for 2 portraits. Here he wears a shirt of bighorn leather, trimmed with ermine tails, locks of hair, quill work, and representations of battles, likely painted himself. The red splatters on the front possibly suggest old war wounds. Madodope would die in the smallpox epidemic of 1837 that devastated the Mandan population. The Hidatsa leader, 2 Ravens, also visited Fort Clark frequently and posed twice for Bodmer. In March 1834, Maximilian and Bodmer witnessed a dance performed by Hidatsa Dog Society members to bring success in battle. Maximilian recalled 2 Ravens, quote, spent several days with us in order to have his portrait taken in the dress of one of the chiefs of the dog band. He wears an eagle wing bone whistle around his neck and holds a rattle made of small hooves or claws, both emblems of his society. His stunning headdress of magpie tail, turkey tail, and down feathers identifies him as one of 4 leaders of his village's dog society. The portrait of 2 Ravens was among the most circulated of the prints that were created under Bodmer's supervision after he and Maximilian returned to Europe in August 1834. They were published to accompany Maximilian's 2-volume travelogue between 1839 and 43, first in German and later in French and English. Looking at the watercolor portraits next to the subsequent hand-colored aquatints, there are considerable differences as the prints often carry additional narrative detail. In this aquatint, 2 Ravens appears with finished leggings, balanced on his left foot with a palpable sense of motion as he leans forward. After assisting Maximilian with the production of prints from the North American journey, Bodmer had a long career creating landscape paintings and prints, working among Barbizon school artists and exhibiting in Paris. He died in 1893. Maximilian died in 1867. His collection of written records, watercolors by Bodmer, and resulting prints from the voyage remained in Germany until the mid-20th century. They arrived in Omaha in 1962, and were on long-term loan to Joslin Art Museum until the Enron Art Foundation gifted the entire collection in 1986. I very much hope that you'll be able to visit the Met before the exhibition closes on July 25th. It features texts by 10 Indigenous scholars, artists, and tribal elders who bring fresh and personal insights to Bodmer's portraits, speaking to the stories they tell and to their lasting legacies for their communities. If you'd like to explore digital resources, I invite you to visit the exhibition's landing page at metmuseum.org, which includes images of all the works, the interpretive texts, as well as programming listings. Thank you.